Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. Today we're going to be doing a video on a topic that I think is going to be very relevant to us, especially as we're coming back to regionals, specifically for those of you who are going to your first regionals. Talk about how you kind of want to build and approach building with those specific teams. You might notice that the camera angle is a little bit different. I actually have a bit of a new setup. I have now an extra monitor here on my left, which is kind of nice because it lets me be extra productive. I kind of feel like one of those like mad scientists where like, you know, like they have or like a hacker where like they have like one setup in front of them and then like two on the side and they like have to swivel from side to side, kind of like that. But yeah, so pretty much when it comes to building for a regional or an event, there's a lot of different ways you can approach it, right? Now, the one thing that I wanted to necessarily discuss when it comes to approaching it, by the way, ignore this name. This is actually what I used for the Zelda challenge. I just had it under a different name because originally I was going to save it for Salt Lake. But yeah. So pretty much when it comes to just building overall, there are like two different ways you can go about it, right? So the first route would be the consistent route, right? Consistent route, right? Then it's pretty much comfort route. And I'm gonna show you guys like how that would look like from my perspective, like how I would approach it. If it were the case of like me trying to prepare for this regional and like I picked one of these approaches, right? So comfort route, and then the last would be, what's it called? Metagame call route. Okay, so basically there are three different ways you can approach it, right? So first off, the consistent route, what I'll say is this is usually the best if like you just want to show up and like you have the best chance of like doing well into whatever field. Like you just get a team that's consistent in the pretty much every matchup you can. An example of this would be something like Zacian Kyogre, right? So like if I were to go with like a consistent route, I'm like going into the regional, I'm like, hey, I want to just use something that I know is good. I don't want to really risk any losses just to like random stuff that I'm not prepared for. And also too, if we just generally consider like the field of the regional, you know, you won't necessarily be worried with like this kind of team about not having a decent matchup until at least almost everything, right? So if we look at that, right, and we go with like the standard build that I was using in the Zelda challenge, right, just as an example, it's like a standard Zacian Kyogre team. Now, the drawbacks of this is that obviously everyone is going to know how, you know, the team plays, I guess. But the benefit is that you, even though like everyone knows how it plays, like you can still just play better. You know what I mean? Like you can actually just like you have the outs to always perform better than your opponent, even if like they know what your team does, just because you have like a very like you have very strong counterplay. You can you have a lot of consistent options that you can leverage versus your opponents. You know, there's only so much that they can do to totally prepare for your version team because there's like 5 different versions of Zacian Kyogre, right? So as long as you're comfortable with your matchups, like that's what's important, right? And like that's kind of the main thing that you want to like keep in mind when it comes to that stuff. So like that's what I would say overall in terms of like how you would look at this or how you would like approach a more consistent route, right? And then like the variation within like what you're bringing pretty much comes from like certain sets. So you can benefit a lot by like changing certain sets or like using something a little bit differently than necessarily you normally would. So you could change like, for example, like Zacian to run substitute, which I don't necessarily think is a good change, but it's just an example, right? Changing Zapdos to safety goggles, Eerie Impulse, running a more offensive Venusaur, running Koba Berry, like changing the items. Like all this stuff is basically small changes which can completely change how a team plays. And that can make it more like advantageous into the field, right? Then we have the comfort route. So the comfort route is typically using an archetype that you're more comfortable with using or something that you've used more that you know how to use, right? So for example, for me, that would probably be something with Yveltal because for the most part, I've played like Yveltal majority of my VGC career, right? So like, let's just open up Yveltal here, right? And Zacian, because this is like a standard like Yveltal archetype. I would probably pick this if I were going like the comfort route just because for the most part, right, you just have that like standard core that you utilize. And like for me, like my comfort core is pretty much like Landers, Zacian, Yveltal, and then this, right? And then like basically what I would do is I would just vary between these two slots of this core just to find what I think is best for like said regional, right? Or like set event. So you have a couple different approaches, right? And like the comfort approach is definitely one that I think might benefit players who are more like they need to kind of memorize certain things, or like not necessarily memorize, but like they just need to like know certain lines into different teams, right? And the main thing that comes into that, or like play with that, is pretty much like how you're able to, I guess, the way I'm thinking of like how you're able to play, right? Like in the end, comfort will always trump like a meta call if like you know how to play it properly, you know? So that's like a big thing to consider, I think, when it comes to like getting ready for events and everything, you know? So that would be the main thing I would keep in mind, especially when making decisions before the event, you know? In terms of anything else that I would necessarily be careful of with comfort is just make sure whatever your comfort core is it matching up super poorly into a certain archetype that's really popular. Like, for example, if you're comfortable with an archetype that really loses hard to, like, okay, if it loses really hard to, for example, like Zacian Ogre, like, you probably shouldn't use it, right? Like, that's not a smart idea. But, like, if it's something that's a little bit more reasonable that, like, you can match up well into, then you should probably be using that, right? So it's just some stuff to keep in mind with, like, the stuff overall. Obviously, there are certain things that are a little bit out of your control in terms of how you can approach stuff. You can't always predict everything you're going to play. And the comfort route kind of allocates, like, your best team in terms of like how well you know how to play it, right? I think this route also works better for players who are like getting more sorted and don't have as much experience in the game, because it kind of allows them to get acclimated with something and continue developing the team over the course of time. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would say. And then you kind of have like the last route that we're going to talk about. I'm just going to put a random like 2 filler mons, right? Like Rotom Heat Gastro, for example, right? Probably wouldn't be the exact 6 I would bring, but like, yeah. And then you finally have the metagame call route. So metagame call route's an interesting one because I feel like in a way, you don't really want to necessarily focus on like anti-meting everything, but just being a little more conscious of like the metagame. Technically, you should do this regardless of what approach you're going for. But even like looking at certain teams that are like doing well and maybe finding an archetype out of the bunch that's performing well that you'd maybe like to take some inspiration from or like use and change some sets for, right? So for example, let's say we're doing that. We look through the IC list of most recently performing well teams. We look through, and I'm like, okay, so Evoltalization, Calyrex, interesting. And then here, right? So Linya's team with Zacian and then Groudon, right? And then Charizard. See, something like that, I'd be like, oh, okay, like, I like this. You know what? I might even consider using this for an event because it seems like it's really solid. I'm going to test it out, and I'm going to see, like, what changes I'd like to make, right? And, like, obviously having the context on the team and kind of understanding, like, what it does is very important as well. But, yeah, obviously, like, that's kind of a benefit there as well, I think, that can definitely, like, pay off for you if you kind of know what you're doing, right? And then we take the last few. We're like, okay, great. You know, like, Grimmsnarl, Incineroar, and then we have Gastro, right? And like this is cool because now when you have a Sun team, we're going to be utilizing a more offensive Charizard mode. We're going to be focused around that, and then it's just kind of optimizing from there to build for certain matchups. So pretty much with that, the main thing to keep in mind is like you saw we had like 3 different ways we looked at it, right? We took inspiration from another team. We looked at certain results. And when you pick other teams that you like, you need to make sure that they're like a justified, like, or a justified decision, I guess. So like when I looked at the bunch, the reason why I specifically picked out this team is running Gastrodon to deal with majority of the other Zacian Ogre teams. Charizard allows you to kind of blow through like all the other teams that are kind of popular, along with Gastrodon, right? Then you have Groudon, which kind of gives you that sun mode and encounter weather. And then you also have Zacian, which can still put on substantial pressure. I would say majority of teams, if you're bringing something to regional, I'd recommend your team has a Zacian on it, unless like there's a really good reason for it not to be on it. And yeah, I mean, like, it's also too a little bit, and we kind of take from the other category here too when I picked the Charizard, like, Groudon stuff, right? Because, like, I kind of have a bit of comfort with screens, right? And that's, like, kind of something I'm used to using. So I took that, and I'm like, okay, well, this is something I'm used to using. I like it. I'm gonna take it and adapt it and use it, right? So that would be my main way I would say you want to kind of approach building for regionals. I know this was a little bit general because, you know, we didn't necessarily get into EVs and sets, but, like, there's other videos for that I made. This one was specifically just about like the 3 different approaches I think you can take to actually like preparing for it, getting ready for it, and how you would want to approach that, right? So Hopefully this was helpful for you guys overall. I really make sure to try and be concise with the information just because I don't really want to overstretch it and like bore you guys out or whatever. I want to try and be like straight to the point and kind of get it across to you guys. But yeah, these are the 3 different approaches you can take. If you guys are looking for teams and inspirations for like the metagame call route, or just like, you know, kind of taking inspiration from like other teams, you can always check out like Liberty Note, for example. You can check out Victory Road, who posts stuff. Limitless has a bunch of resources there. But yeah, also too, that's actually worth noting. I'm gonna actually go here, Limitless TCG. Limitless TCG. There we go. So I'm gonna go here. So this is how you do, guys. Okay, let's say we go on the Limitless site, right? You guys, because a lot of you guys in the comments were like, how do you access it? So pretty much here, Decks, VGC, there you go. And then boom, you have all the stuff here. Click on one of the archetypes you'd like. You can look at everyone's list to perform well with the team, right? So that's pretty much it. Once again, guys, thank you so much for all the support. I incredibly appreciate it. It means a lot, you know, always to have the support. Make sure to check out Patreon. Make sure to check out coaching if you guys would like to improve your skills. And Patreon, also to beyond improving your skills, also a great way to support me as well. Same with coaching. But yeah, thank you guys so much for all the support, as always. And I will see you guys on the next video. Peace.